recorded. All right, folks, January 1st, 2020, New Year's Day. January 1st, 2021. What am I saying? Had the opening and botched it. January 1st, 2021. This is DPP coming at you for the first time in 2021. Happy New Year. We hope that everybody has a good New Year and a good year and lots of blessings. Okay, we are here for one reason only, and that is to hear bad jokes. No, we are here for one reason only, and that is to study some Torah. So without further ado, we are going to do that. Today is Friday. We're going to study the 6th and 7th readings of our Torah portion, Vayechi, which is the final portion of Genesis. And as we conclude, we're going to wish each other chazak, when it's chazek, the traditional blessing of be strong, and may we be strengthened as we conclude the book. So I'm going to share my screen with you. It's going to get a little tricky, as it sometimes does. I just changed orientation. Hope that didn't throw you off too much. Now you're like, what just happened with the screen? I'm going to share my screen on my phone. I'm hoping that this works. And if it doesn't, let me know. I'm going to mute everybody. You can unmute, though, at any point, especially if I have a question. But also, if you have a question or have a comment, feel free to jump in. Okay. I'm sharing my screen. And let me know. Do you see that? Chabad.org, Vayechi?
Yes.
All right. Yes. Beautiful. What could go wrong then? Oh, we're not finished yet with the blessings. Friends, we have one tribe left. So just to bring everybody in on this, and I think everyone's up to speed, but let's just make sure. So Jacob, the third of three patriarchs, Jacob, right? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob is in the final moments of his life, and he's blessing. He called his children to gather around his bed, and he's giving them a blessing or giving them instructions before he passes away. And so we've gone through, he's addressed 11 of his 12 sons. And beginning this reading, we have the final tribe, or the final son, Benjamin. So Genesis chapter 49, verse 27, Benjamin is a wolf. He will pray. Now, pray is not with an A. He'll also pray with an A, but pray means he will be on the hunt. In the morning, he will devour plunder, and in the evening, he will divide the spoil. Now, let's see what that means. So, let's see. Okay, here we go. It's a reference to the story of Purim, as Rashi says. Look at this third Rashi, and in the evening, he will divide the spoil. Even when the sun will set for Israel through Nebuchadnezzar, who will exile them to Babylon, he, Benjamin, will divide the spoil. In other words, even in the dark times of Jewish history, the tribe of Benjamin, Benjamin's offspring, will be able to divide the spoil. What does that mean? It refers to Mordechai and Esther. Those were the Jewish heroes, of course, of the Purim story, who were of the tribe of Benjamin, will divide the spoils of Haman. As it is said, behold, the house of Haman I've given to Esther. That's what the king said. Onkelos, however, rendered it as regarding the spoils of the priests, i.e. the holy things of the temple, namely the priest's share of the sacrifices. Okay, let's stick with the first explanation, which I really enjoy. It's not about me, but nonetheless, I enjoy that one. So it says that from the tribe of Benjamin, from Mordechai and Esther were from the tribe of Benjamin, and the allusion here in this blessing from Jacob's blessing to Benjamin is that in the morning when it's good, he'll devour plunder, and even in the evening, even when things are dark, he will still divide the spoil. The Jewish people and the heroes stemming from the tribe of Benjamin will be triumphant. Okay, now comes the summary or the conclusion of the blessings. All these, verse 28, all these are the 12 tribes of Israel. If you're wondering, where is the first time tribes are mentioned as opposed to sons? Here you go. This is the first time that the word tribes are mentioned, referring to the 12 sons of Jacob as the 12 tribes of Israel. So all these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father spoke to them and blessed them. Each man, according to his blessing, he blessed them. And that's very significant, because what we're saying is they were not just 12 individuals, but they were 12 fathers of tribes in their own right. And so each blessing that we just read that Jacob gave to each of his 12 sons, they weren't just individual blessings, but rather they were tribal blessings. They contain blessings for their subsequent descendants after them as well. And I like that last line: each man according to his blessing he blessed them. He gave each one a blessing that was appropriate to the specific one. Take a look at Rashi. It says according to, okay, take a look at this Rashi. And this is what their father spoke to them and blessed them. Look at Rashi. Now, is it not so that some of them he did not bless, but in fact chided? No, he chastised some of them. Reuben, Shimon, Levi, he criticized them. So what kind of blessing is that? Rather, Rashi says, this is what is intended. And this is what their father spoke to them, what is related in this section. One might think that he did not bless Reuben, Shimon, and Levi. Therefore, scripture states, and he blessed them, meaning all of them. Now, what does that mean? Let's continue with the Rashis. According to his blessing, with the blessing destined to befall each of them, he blessed them. So it says first singular and then plural. Each man according to his blessing, he blessed them. Scripture, Rashi says, scripture should have said each man according to his blessing, he blessed him. Why does scripture say he blessed them in the plural? Since Jacob bestowed upon Judah the might of a lion, and upon Benjamin the power to seize like a wolf, and upon Naphtali the fleetness of a gazelle, I might think that he did not include all of them in all the blessings. Therefore, scripture states he blessed them. In other words, everyone got all the blessings. So to explain, and just in simple terms, what that means, what Rashi is saying is this verse 28 that summarizes and kind of concludes the blessings, where it says that Jacob, the father, spoke to each of his 12 sons, each of the 12 tribes, and he blessed each man according to his blessing. He blessed them. Why them and not him? To indicate that the blessing for one tribe, although primarily for that tribe, also can extend and bleed over, so to speak, to the other tribe, which means that all 12 blessings apply to all 12 tribes in some way. Primarily, each tribe got their individual blessing, but nonetheless, they were all blessed collectively as well with the other blessings. That's why we can say that he also blessed Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, his oldest three sons, even though he didn't bless them, he chastised them. But since the blessings went to the other sons, and everyone shares on some level all the blessings, so that's how the math works. All right, I can't see you, so I'm checking in verbally. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Verse 29. And here we go. Once again, Jacob is concerned about his being laid to rest. And Jacob commanded his sons, and he said to them, I will be brought into my people, which means I will pass away. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which field Abraham bought from Ephron the Hittite for burial property. He's being very specific about where he wants to be buried. Bury me in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. It's basically what he's saying. And there, he just talks about the history now of the cave. There they buried Abraham and his wife Sarah. There they buried Isaac and his wife Rebekah. And there, Jacob says, I buried my dear wife Leah. Remember, Rachel was buried on the side of the road. But Leah was buried there. The purchase, this tells us, by the way, that he was predeceased by his wife, Leah. The purchase of the field, verse 32, the purchase of the field and the cave therein was from the sons of Heth. He's basically giving them a lot of landmarks to make sure they get the right cave to bury him in. It's the one that's in the Mishpacha. It's the one that Abraham bought. It's the one where Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and Leah are buried. Okay. Verse 33. Here we go. This is the end. And Jacob concluded commanding his sons, and he drew his legs up into the bed and expired and was brought into his people. And that's the passing of Jacob. Next verse, Genesis chapter 50, verse 1. Joseph fell on his father's face, and he wept over him and kissed him. Now, the Torah does not specify the mourning reaction of the other 11 sons. But what it does tell us is that Joseph falls on his father's face, wept for him, and kissed him. Verse number 2. And Joseph commanded his servants, the physicians of Egypt, to embalm his father, and the physicians embalmed Israel. By the way, this is a very, very big conversation in Jewish law about embalming. Embalming, and again, unmute yourself if you can help me with this. Embalming means preserving the body, correct?
Right. But we don't.
So in a way that it should not decompose, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
My understanding is that he was embalmed so that he would not decompose before he would reach his burial place in Israel, back home in Israel. So maybe this was a way to keep the body fresh and preserved. Maybe it was a standard practice in Egypt, and for some reason it had to happen. But either way, this is what happened. He was embalmed. As to whether or not in a Jewish burial there's embalming today, the answer is no. There is no embalming. Let's continue. Verse number 3. And 40 days were completed for him, for so are the days of embalming completed, and the Egyptians wept over him for 70 days. So there was an embalming period, there was a mourning period, 40 days, 70 days, maybe 70 total, including the 40 days. Okay, let's continue. Verse 4. When the days of his weeping had passed, so again, just understand this. Jacob, according to this understanding of Torah, was not immediately transported to Israel to be buried. There was a time period, it seems like of a few months, where he remained in Egypt for the embalming and the mourning and the eulogies and all that stuff.
Where?
Where?
Yeah.
I don't know. In Goshen?
Where did they keep his body?
I don't know. I don't know if Rashi, I can try to toggle Rashi. It's a little bit, yeah, why not? Do it on my phone. Let's see if Rashi mentions anything about this. Yeah. They completed for him the days of his embalming when 40 days were completed for him. Okay, Egyptians wept for 70 days. So Rashi explains 40 days for embalming and 30 for weeping. Why were they so in mourning? Because a blessing had come to them when he arrived. The famine ended and the waters of the Nile increased. We talked about that before. Was it last week? I think even we mentioned this. I think it was last week that when Jacob moved to Egypt, the famine ended. The Nile rose to Pharaoh's feet. And so he had brought blessings, so people mourned him. Rashi does not clarify where he was in that time. I guess where he was is where he was, wherever they kept him. They didn't bury him. They kept him. Listen, Ray, I think your question is, my question is, and I think what you're getting at with your question is, it doesn't sound like such a Jewish way to do it. We lay a body to rest and, pretty much immediately, the same day or the next day, or, maybe in 2 days, but we don't wait 70 days. So what's going on with this? I don't have a good answer for that. We would have to look up the commentaries. I don't have, off the top of my head, a good answer. I've wondered it before. I've never really looked into it. I'm sure commentaries are discussing it. The only thing I could say is it seems like that was normative Egyptian practice. And although we might say, well, who cares? So who cares if it's normative Egyptian practice? This is Jacob we're talking about. Lay him to rest. I don't know. This is the way it happened. It's a good question. We'll have to look up the answer.
Rabbi, I still feel like here Joseph fell on his father's face and wept. Where was he? All those years, Pharaoh would have let him go to see his father. That bothers me terribly.
I hear you. He should have visited his father. Well, understand this. For most of the time in Egypt, Joseph was a slave or incarcerated, so he couldn't, purchase a ticket and go home. When he became viceroy, that's when the question is. The only answer that we have is the only answer that I know of is the one that I shared, I don't know, a few days ago, I think, or maybe last week, which is that for some reason, God was in on it also. Jacob was not able to find this out until it was time, until it was predestined. Now,
Right.
one other, but let me add another wrinkle that I didn't share before, and you guys might find interesting, and that is that Joseph was away from his father for the exact number of years that Jacob was away from his father. Remember, Jacob left home to escape
Yes.
Esau, and he was
Yeah.
by Laban, etc. for 20 years or 22 years. It was pretty much the exact same amount of time that
Oh,
Joseph was
wow.
away. And our sages tell us that because Jacob didn't practice kibbud av, honoring his father, for those years, he had his son away from him for the same number of years. So I'm not saying it's a punishment. I'm not saying it's that he. I'm just quoting our sages, which seem to indicate that maybe there's some sort of connection there, and then I'll let you understand it as you wish. All right, let's continue. Verse number 4. I'm sorry for that. I'm getting WhatsApped over here. Okay, verse number 4. When the days of his weeping had passed, so when the mourning period had passed, Joseph spoke to Pharaoh's household, saying, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, speak now in Pharaoh's ears, saying, take this message to the big boss. My father," and here's the quote. Joseph is saying, "My father adjured me, made me promise, saying, behold, I'm going to die in my grave, which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. There you shall bury me." In other words, bury me back home in Canaan. So now Joseph asks, "Please let me go up and bury my father and return." Now, I've told you already twice in the last week or two about this dialogue where Pharaoh says, "No, keep him here. He's been a blessing. I want him buried here." And Joseph says, "No, I promised." And Pharaoh says, "Break your promise." And Joseph says, "If I break my promise to him, I'll break my promise to you. And I'll tell everybody that I know one more language than you. I know Hebrew, and therefore I should be the Pharaoh." So Pharaoh says, "Okay, fine, no problem. Go ahead and bury him." So this is verse 6. And Pharaoh said, "Go up and bury your father as he adjured you." In other words, as you promised, keep your promise, keep it to me, keep it to him, and go up and bury your father. So Joseph, verse 7, so Joseph went up to bury his father and all Pharaoh's servants. So Joseph leaves Egypt. Seems like the first time he left Egypt, when his parents were coming down, when his father was coming down and his family was coming down, he met them in Egypt. This is the first time that Joseph leaves to go back to Canaan in all those years. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and all Pharaoh's servants, the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt went up with him. In other words, the royalty and nobility of Pharaoh's house went up also. And Joseph's entire household and his brothers and his father's household, the whole mishpacha went up for the burial. Only their young children and their flocks and cattle did they leave in the land of Goshen. They only left the kids and the animals behind. And chariots and horsemen also went up with him, and the camp was very numerous. A big entourage to lay Jacob to rest. And they came to the threshing floor of the thorn bushes, which is on the other side of the Jordan. And there they conducted a very great and impressive eulogy. And he made for his father a mourning of 7 days. And here is the first time we have, actually, I don't know if it's the first time we have this, there's the idea of Shiva, 7 days of mourning. Maybe you have that also by Sarah's passing with Abraham. I don't remember. It's not conducive for me to look it up right now on my phone. But here we certainly find a 7-day mourning period. The Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, they saw the mourning at the threshing floor of the thorn bushes, and they said, "This is an intense mourning for the Egyptians." In other words, they recognized that this was a very special burial and ceremony. Therefore, they named it Abel Mitzrayim, Egypt mourns, or Avel Mitzrayim, Egypt mourns, which is on the other side of the Jordan. The name where the eulogies took place for those 7 days, the name was called Abel Avel Mitzrayim, which means the mourning of Egypt, or the Egypt with the OU, like mourning, like the sorrow. And his sons, verse 12, Jacob's sons did to him just as he had commanded them. And his sons carried him to the land of Canaan. They buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah, the field that Abraham had bought for burial property from Ephron the Hittite before Mamre. So Joseph followed orders, and the brothers followed the orders, and Jacob was laid to rest where he wanted, in the cave of Machpelah. All right, so that concludes the laying to rest of Jacob. Let's continue. Now it gets a bit of drama here. And Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all who had gone up with him to bury his father after he had buried his father. So everyone comes back. Now, everyone up 7 days, and now they're back in Egypt. Let's take a look at verse 15. Now Joseph's brothers saw that their father had died, and they said to themselves, perhaps Joseph will hate us and return to us all the evil that we did to him. They were thinking, oh no, our father is gone, and now I bet, they said, now we bet Joseph is going to finally get revenge. Until now, if father was alive, he probably didn't want to make father upset. But now that father has passed, oh no, we're done for. Joseph is going to hate us and take revenge upon us and make our lives miserable. Verse 16. So this is going on in their heads. Again, they're plotting their own plots. So they commanded messengers to go to Joseph to say, your father, listen to this. They made this up. Your father, Jacob, commanded us before his death, saying, so shall you say to Joseph, please forgive now your brother's transgression and their sin, for they did evil to you. And look what they're saying. They sent a message to Joseph saying, before he died, our father, Jacob, told us to tell you that you should forgive us. If that was the case, why didn't he just tell Joseph directly, forgive your brothers? Don't give them a hard time after I'm gone. Because they made it up. Now, please forgive the transgression of the servants of God, of the God of your fathers. Now they're asking for forgiveness. I think this is the first time that they're actually asking for forgiveness. I don't believe they've asked for forgiveness yet. When Joseph revealed himself, his identity, they were too shocked to answer. And then Joseph says, don't worry, it's okay, don't feel bad. But I don't know that they ever said, please forgive us until now. Now, they couched it in a story that father said to us to tell you to forgive us, but then they do ask for forgiveness. The second half of verse 17, they say the words, now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Now, if you know Joseph by now, if Joseph is really Joseph, and if you and I know Joseph, then you and I know that Joseph is not planning on taking revenge, that this is still in their heads. They still, after all these years, they still don't really get him. 22 years, but let's do the math. 22 years plus 17 years, right? Jacob passed away after 17 years in Egypt. So 22 plus 17, this is 39 years later after they first sold him. Almost 40 years after they first sold him and kidnapped and sold him, they still don't understand. They still don't really get him. They still think that he has it out for them. He never had it out for them. It's all in their heads. All right, so he cries. His brothers also went and fell before him, and they said, behold, we are your slaves. They're like upping the ante. They're like negotiating against themselves. Forgive us. We're your slaves. We'll do whatever you want. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid, for am I instead of God? What are you confessing your sins to me? What are you saying like I've sinned? Speak to God if you have something to make up to God. Indeed, and once again, Joseph reiterates this point, and it's such a message for us in our own lives. Indeed, you intended evil against me, but God designed it for good in order to bring about what is as at present. Sorry, let me read this again. In order to bring about what is at present to keep a great populace alive. He says to them, you have nothing to confess to me about. You have nothing to ask forgiveness about from me. You can speak to God if you need to clean things up with God. But as for me, yes, you intended to harm me, but God has had other intentions. And although you acted to harm me, God designed it for the good. And what's the good? To put me where I am right now and to keep a great populace alive, to feed everybody and to keep everybody safe. Once again, Joseph is saying, I never gave you that power over me. You wanted to have that power over me. You wanted to hurt me, but you're not God. You're not God, and you can't hurt me unless I allow myself to be hurt by you. And I don't. I only allow myself to be guided by God, and God has intended for me to be a blessing to others. Let me check in as we segue over to reading number 7. Before we do that, let me check in. I don't want to necessarily toggle away from this, but verbally, if you don't mind, unmute yourself. Let me know. Does this make sense? Any questions, comments, reactions? Go ahead, please. Anybody, just so I know that you guys are there.
It makes sense.
It makes sense.
Okay. Listen, I know I'm a broken record on this. I am amazed and awed at Joseph and his perspective. And even though he could have taken the opportunity now that his father was gone, to maybe turn a cold shoulder to his brothers, at the very least, he doesn't. Let's continue. Joseph continues talking to his brothers. Genesis chapter 50, verse 21. We're in the final stretch of this Torah portion and the book of Genesis. So now Joseph says, do not fear. Don't be afraid, guys. I will sustain you and your small children. I'm still going to take care of you. Nothing to worry about. And he comforted them and spoke to their hearts. Look at this. He's comforting them. It's unbelievable. This guy, Joseph, unbelievable. After all they did to him, he's the one reassuring them. Let's continue. So Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's household. And Joseph lived 110 years. We're kind of wrapping up the story of Joseph and his brothers. So he lived 110 years. Hold on one second. Let's do the math. He was kidnapped at the age of 17. Right? He was kidnapped at the age of 17. It was 13 years later. 13 years. Trying to remember the math here. All right. It was 22 years later that he was reunited with his father. So he was 39. Right? So that's 40, basically, essentially 40 years old. Right? 17 plus 22. And then, so fast forward another bunch of years. So he lived a total of 110 years. And Joseph saw, we're kind of wrapping up Joseph's life. Joseph saw children of a third generation born to Ephraim. Also, the sons of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were born on Joseph's knees. In other words, he saw his children grow up, and he saw his children have children, and those children had children. In other words, he saw his great-grandchildren. Does that make sense? He saw a third generation born to Ephraim, his son, which means child, grandchild, I think great-grandchildren. Either
Yes.
great or great-great, one of those two. Whatever he saw, basically, he got nachas. He saw lots of kinderlach, lots of generations being born. Joseph said to his brothers, verse 24, again, we're fast-forwarding the narrative. Joseph said to his brothers, I am going to die. He was 110 years old. I'm going to die. God, and look what he says. God will surely remember you and take you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. You're not going to stay in Egypt forever, he tells them. God will remember you and bring you out of this place. And Joseph adjured the children of Israel, saying, he made them promise. He made the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, he made the family promise. What's the promise? God will surely remember you, and you shall take up my bones out of here. And I love this idea. He made them promise. And what's the promise? You think the promise is the second half of the verse. Take my bones. When you leave, take my bones out of here. Not right away, like my father asked me to do. Leave me in Egypt for the duration. But when the Exodus happens, you shall take my bones out of here. Don't leave me behind when you leave Egypt. Don't leave me behind with Pharaoh. Take me with you when you go. But the promise is not just the second half. The promise is the first half. He made the children of Israel promise, God will surely remember you. Promise you will remember the promise of redemption. Promise that you'll never forget that you don't belong here, that you will have another life, another destiny outside of Egypt. Promise that you'll keep the flame of hope burning in your heart, burning in your soul, burning in your mind constantly. That's promise number one. Remember God's promise. Promise that you'll remember God's promise. And the second promise is, and when that happens, take me out of here with you. Verse 26, the final verse of the entire book of Genesis, the first book of the 5 books of Moses, the first book of Torah. Let's read it. And Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and they embalmed him and he was placed in the coffin in Egypt. And then we say, Chazak, Chazak, v'nis chazek. Be strong, and be strengthened. Say with me, Chazak,
Chazak,
v'nis chazek. That is the traditional blessing that we say to conclude the book, a book of the Torah, and it reminds us that although we've concluded the book, there's still much more. There's still much more to explore, and we will be back. We're going to continue studying Torah. We will even be back to these stories and these insights. But one thing to mention, it seems like the book of Genesis is ending on a negative note, right? The whole book of Exodus, which begins with creation and hope, ends with Joseph being placed into a coffin in Egypt. That's it? Wow, how morbid. That's how the whole book ends, with Joseph in a coffin. But of course, there's a deeper meaning here, and the deeper meaning is regarding what I told you already, I think either earlier this week or last week, earlier this week, on Monday, I told you this, that Jacob and Joseph had different approaches of leadership. Jacob's approach is, I'm going to lead from the outside, so take me to Canaan, and from the Holy Land, I'll be able to guide you and inspire you. And Joseph's form of leadership was, I'm going to stay with you. I'm not abandoning ship. For the duration, for the centuries of exile, I will be with you. And the idea of him being placed into the coffin in Egypt is not a source of it's not a morbid tale. It's a tale of hope. It's a tale of a promise for the future. Joseph is saying, I am with you. God is with you. I'm not leaving you. God is not leaving you. There's a promise, and I'm not leaving until you leave. And I'm so confident, I'm putting my own remains on the line, so to speak. I'm there in a coffin in Egypt with you. It's not morbid. It's not foreboding. On the contrary, it's hopeful and it's positive. All right. I hope that makes sense, what I just shared with you. And I'm going back to stop sharing to be able to see you. All right. Hey, guys. How's it going?
Hi.
All right.
I have a question.
Thus concludes the book of Genesis. Any questions or comments?
Yes.
Hold on one second. Donna, go ahead.
Okay, so was there still a famine? I mean,
There was no famine.
so he
The famine was gone.
Yeah.
The famine ended the moment Jacob stepped foot in Egypt and blessed Pharaoh. The famine ended. Now, recall that was 17 years prior, because Jacob lived for 17 years in Egypt before he died. So there hadn't been a famine for 17 years. And still, Joseph says, when the brothers are begging him for, pleading for mercy, and Joseph's like, dude, you got me all wrong. You're still reading me wrong. I don't have any animosity towards you, right? I'm here to serve. I'm here to help. I'm here to feed you. Although there wasn't a famine, he was still the guy with connections. He was still the viceroy. And so anything they needed, whether they needed a new traffic light or whether they needed a new playground for the
So
kids.
it's better conditions still in Egypt, and they were confident that in the future they would be returned.
Yes. So Joseph took care of them. And with Joseph's passing, I mentioned this a day or two ago, with Joseph's passing, that's when the slavery started to kick in. Until Joseph was alive, everything was still on the up and up. When Joseph dies and that generation, kind of the original generation of the tribes dies out, like the sons of Jacob, then the next generation, they start getting the brunt of Egyptian servitude, and then it gets really bad, as we'll see next week in the book.
Was it a new pharaoh?
We'll talk about that next week. Well, there's a dispute. Some say it was a new pharaoh, and some say it was a pharaoh who pretended like he didn't know history, which may be worse, right? Some say, but we'll talk about that next week. Joy.
And we had talked, I think you had mentioned last week that God spoke to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but didn't speak to Joseph. But all of Joseph's communications, when he had his dreams, and they said, the slave knows, he said, no, it's not me, it's coming from God. And he told his brothers, this is not, you have to talk to God. All this was planned from God. So they may not have spoken, but he knew he was an emissary of God.
Exactly. He knew that he was in that type of tight relationship where God was communicating with him on some level. God was inspiring him, and he did not make a move without that type of, checking in, whatever that means for him. He walked with God, and he had that connection. And it's because of that connection, frankly, that he survived and thrived. Manasseh and Ephraim. There's no way that he could have done it without that perspective. The perspective of God is with me, and God is communicating with me, and God is guiding me every step of the way. That led him to greatness. That led him to where he was, and that led him to be a mensch. It didn't only lead him to become great himself and then be obnoxious and be, petty to his brothers. It led him to be a mensch. And when his brothers said, "Oh, father said, please forgive us," and they throw themselves at his feet, he says, "Guys, what are you doing? I love. It doesn't matter what you intended. It's not you. You don't run the world. God runs the world." That's a guy who really believes. That's a guy who really genuinely believes. You can't touch that guy. That guy's untouchable. That guy's untouchable. The only reality to that guy is God. Everything else, nishnageh. It's not you. It's not relevant. So you wanted to hurt me. You wanted a negative outcome. So what? So who made you God? You're not God. What he's telling them is, don't give yourselves so much power that you think you actually hurt me. Right? He's almost chastising them. Almost. Nah, he's doing it with love, but he's almost, correcting them. Not almost. He is correcting them, saying, you think that you have power over me and that you hurt me. Don't flatter yourselves. He wasn't saying that in a mean way. I'm saying it in a biting way. But who gave you power? Since God's in control and God meant it for a blessing. And I'm here to be a blessing. If you and I could, even in one small way, bring that perspective into our own lives, oh my gosh. Are we ever victims? We're not victims, right? Are we ever under someone else's control? Not if we choose not to, right? Somebody could think they're in control. That's fine. It's good for you. I mean, you think that, wonderful, thank you very much. But me, I walk with God. I walk with Hashem, and God has a plan for me. And the plan is something great, something magnificent. So catch you on the other side, but that's, and I'm here to help. I'm here to help you, and whatever. It doesn't matter what you want to do. There's another reality. That's Joseph in a nutshell. And Joseph, in that perspective, are buried in Egypt in a coffin. That's how the book of Genesis ends. It seems, if you just read it, it's like, oh my God, so depressing. Joseph is dead. Jacob is dead. Joseph is in a coffin in Egypt. Jacob is gone, and Joseph's in a coffin, and now slavery begins. It's terrible. Terrible. But if you look at it on another level, Joseph is with the people. Joseph's perspective is with the people. He says, promise me that you know that God's in control. Never give power to Pharaoh. Now, they didn't listen, and they gave power to Pharaoh, and that's part of what the problem was. But the moment they turned to God, and God jumps back in the picture, is the moment the wheels start turning for the Exodus and for the redemption. But we'll save that and the discussion for next week as we begin book 2, the Exodus. The journey continues. All right.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Question about property. So I know the people gave their, let's say, I forgot if it was like land or sheep or whatever, their property to Pharaoh in Egypt. Is that, I guess, almost kind of I guess how the slavery happened, because they still own all the things. I'm assuming they didn't give it back to the people after the payment was over, or did they return the
government doesn't usually give back what it has. That's the rule of thumb. The government doesn't usually give back. Doesn't usually, right? I'm gonna leave, what's it called? The package that they just passed. Stimulus. I'll leave stimulus packages out of it. Typically the government is taking, and not necessarily always. By the way, I'm not anti-government. I'm just, so I would agree with you that the ancient Pharaoh and whatever was probably not returning the property back. It was more of like, we own it officially, but we'll let you live and we'll let you work and we'll let you earn, but you still have to pay a fifth of a tribute or a tax to Pharaoh. Is that where the slavery started? Did Joseph, unintended consequence, did he kind of start the process of slavery on his own people? Could we say that? Perhaps. I mean, certainly that wasn't the intention, and that wasn't targeted for the Jewish people. And certainly that specific targeting of the Jewish people was a campaign of the Pharaoh, as we'll read in next on Monday, this coming Monday next week. But could that be part of it? When the government becomes so powerful, then things slide maybe in a negative direction? Perhaps.
Right.
Perhaps. I haven't necessarily seen that in the commentaries, but it's an interesting observation. It's an interesting observation. It wouldn't be the first time. Well, it wouldn't be the last time, at least, if this is the case, that people had good intentions, and the way it worked out. There was a guy, Fritz Haber. You know the story, Fritz Haber? He created Zyklon A. He created artificial fertilizer, saved the world. The world was running out of food.
Oh,
Not enough food. Fritz Haber, you can look him up. He was a chemist. He saved the world. Jewish, German scientist. So he saved the world. Artificial fertilizer. Unintended consequence, that became the forerunner to Zyklon B, which is the gas that was used in the concentration camps against his own people. So again, history has this way of, doing things that, that are a little bit crazy like that. So could you say that? I don't know. I'm a little hesitant to say for sure that's what happened, but certainly the government did get a lot of stuff and a lot of grip on people and things due to this whole story with Joseph at the helm. But yeah, excellent observation. Donna, go ahead.
Why do we know why Joseph didn't return to Canaan while he was alive with all of
That's a great question also. Donna's asking a great question. If the famine was over for 17 years, so why didn't Joseph say, hey guys, you came down here to get food. Turns out the famine's done. Let's go back home. Here's one answer. And we have to check the commentaries. I know, listen, if I have the books in front of me, yeah, but I'm in a car now. There's not many books around, just seats and doors and a roof, right? But here is one thought on it. The Torah doesn't tell us that the famine ended everywhere. It just says that in Egypt, there was a blessing from Jacob that the Nile River specifically should rise to Pharaoh and irrigate the land in Egypt, and Egypt had food. We still don't know that the famine in Canaan also disappeared. Does that make sense? It could have only been a localized blessing and a localized end to the famine. Now, you could still ask, but 7 years of famine is not 17 years in Egypt. So after the 7 years of famine, you would imagine, so for 10 years, right, 17 minus 7 is 10. For 10 years, even in Canaan, there shouldn't have been a famine. So why didn't they move back? I don't have a good answer for that. It's a good question. Why didn't they all say, it's been real, it's been great, thanks for the ride, we're going back home? It seems like on a human level, they settled and it was comfortable, and their brother was in charge of the country. So hey, why not? Very comfortable place to live. In Canaan, there was, you and I know, right, the story with Dinah, the abduction of Dinah. There was some friction with the locals, right? Abimelech and previous generations stuffing up the wells. It wasn't always so smooth in Canaan. Here you are in Egypt with your brother as the viceroy. That's a great life.
It was a diaspora.
It was good. That's on a human level. On a spiritual level, you could say somehow they knew that they needed to be in exile. God had told Abraham that there's going to be a challenge. Maybe they had to set themselves up for it. It seems frustrating, though. It's like, we could avoid the whole story. Just leave before it's too late. Again, there's a human level, and there's a relatable level of understanding, and then maybe a spiritual, cosmic level. It wasn't meant to be. I don't know. It's a good question. It's a solid question. We know that it had to be, and that's it. But why couldn't they have averted it? I don't know. Maybe they tried.
Rabbi,
Yeah. Ray, go ahead.
How do I get the book? What is the name of the book?
Which book?
The next book what we're going to be learning from.
Wednesday night.
Oh, we're not learning from it. I mean, we learn just from the online thing.
Oh,
Are you talking
we're
about-
not learning.
Wednesday night.
That's Wednesday night. Yes, Wednesday night is on Amazon. Send me an email, please, and I'll send you the link to buy it on Amazon.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. It's I don't have the link handy.
Okay.
on my phone. So yeah, but I'll send it to you
Thank you.
as soon as I get the email and back home. All right, good to see. I'll let you all go. Happy New Year's, Max and Joy and Donna and Ray and Sandrine and Matt. Great to see you all. Great to study together.
Thank you.
Happy and healthy.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy
Good
New Year.
Shabbos.
Take care,
Happy
Happy New Year. Shabbat
Bye.
shalom.